strategies because that's where the most research has been done. Pedagogical, I'm going to touch on one idea there. But again, every field is going to have different pedagogy that they need to address. There's different things that you can do. So this is something that be aware of, pay attention to, come back later for other lectures. And then content is how do we actually present the content? And again, I'll share one idea there as well. So we'll start with input presentation strategies. Not sure how this is going to work with the online groups and so many are online, but one of the things I would like you to do, if you're in the room, is take 1 minute to talk to your neighbor and tell them a key idea from what I have told you so far. One idea, and 1 minute or less. About what I just said, whatever we just talked about. One thing that sticks out to you. Go to the front, go to the back. There, she's got a partner. Do you want to come here? Because he's also a student. Got 2 students. Can they chat?
Yes.
Is there chat available?
Or
no?
Yes. But because the voice cannot connect.
Can they not hear me?
No. So I open a Google Meet and
Trying to
just check. Yes.
Okay. All right. Any questions so far? We're good? Any questions? No. All right. One of the things you can do in class, if you're wanting questions to come to students, if they do have questions, is you can threaten by saying, if you don't ask me, I will ask you. And so that will encourage them to ask. It works. All right. So input presentation strategies, we're going to break it down this way. We're going to start with linguistics. Linguistic is language. So these are actual language strategies. We don't have voice online is the problem. Linguistic is the language strategies. And so, again, these same Italian researchers broke it down as to cue dress. These are the things that good lecturers are doing with their students linguistically. They are asking questions. They are giving definitions. They are using repetition. They are using examples. They're providing summaries and signposting. All of this is language-based. Now, I would argue questioning is also pedagogical. It's a way of presenting content and it's part of pedagogy. So teaching with questions. What does that look like?
Endless process of asking.
Endless process of asking, okay. What else?
I guess it's highly important when you get all the time with the audience, especially if you have a hard topic to discuss.
Okay, so questions can help a hard topic not be quite so hard. There's different kinds of questions that we can ask, right? We've got open-ended, we've got closed questions. We also have, if you're doing a case study, I watched a marketing professor show up, like to talk about a case study. So the case study is on the material they've read before class. The entire time he's asking questions to pull out key points in it to get their observations on the case study. So he's asking questions for them to pay attention. Yeah.
Well, I just observed a class where a teacher was trying to ask questions and no one would answer.
Okay.
And he said, "Oh, I know, I'm used to this. These students don't answer, so I'll just answer." So he answered all his own questions.
Yeah. Okay, so what do? If in that situation, when students are not responding, what do we do?
Change the question.
Change the question.
Just talk with communication.
Just what?
Just talk with, not talk at.
Talk with. Yes, talk with them, not at them. One of the things I will do if I'm having students that are reluctant and I want them to speak, same thing I just did with you. Do it where it's anonymous. Put it onto Slido so they're texting it, they're putting their question onto their answers onto the screen so that they're not being singled out for their answers. Do something where they can respond anonymously. Another way of doing it is I will, students are in rows. I will say, someone from this row, give me an answer. I do that today, in fact. I was asking in my morning class, so I had three basic categories of just like 3 groups of students. I was like, okay, somebody from here, give me an answer. What do you think? I just needed one answer to pop up. And I was like, okay, somebody from the middle. Now, what do you think? I did not need everybody, but by putting the pressure on that small group, somebody was gonna speak up. So I put pressure on specifically, not the whole class, what do you do, but here. Another element is culture here. With Taiwanese students, there's a collective culture going on. And so because of this collectivism, no one wants to stand up. Because if they stand up, then they will be pushed down by their peers. Like, why are you answering? You make the rest of us look stupid. Or they're afraid themselves of looking stupid and standing, like making a failure of themselves. So we've got to help that collectivism issue. So one way around that is with questions. We've got the time. Give them time to discuss first. Then they're representing their group and they're not standing out by themselves. That has changed my classroom when I realized that dynamic. By giving them that opportunity to, okay, this group come up with, like, talk to your neighbor, come up with an answer, and then you're representing your group. That's a cultural thing. Providing definitions. What are some ways we can provide students with definitions in the EMI context? One is a glossary ahead of time. There was one of a coworker at another, colleague at another university. They had a tradition where this department would pass down the glossary. They become sophomores. They pass their glossary on to the incoming freshmen. It was a department-built glossary for this class that the professor encouraged them to do that. So each group was responsible for adding to the glossary and passing it on to the next ones. So they automatically came to the class with this set of work terms that were provided for them by their upperclassmen so they could succeed too. But it doesn't have to be done that way. Professor could say, these are the words you're going to need to know that, like, have them before you come in. Other ways we can provide definitions is like I just did with stick the Chinese on there, give it to them briefly, give them the definition on the screen so that they don't have to take the time to pull out their phone to look into Google to figure it out. Because if they want to know, they're going to. I have to, but if I can keep distracted by the notification that popped up while I look for the definition of the word that I choose. So providing them on the PowerPoint, providing in Chinese, even briefly, orally in Chinese is okay. What else? Other ways we can provide definitions. One of the things students mentioned was taking very difficult words and expressing them in simple terms. And so that takes work to learn to do. But if you can think ahead of time, it will be problematic. These are the words they're not going to know. Simply. And then make sure they know which word you're defining. They're defining it. If you can provide the definitions, it will help. So you have to look ahead to where will the trigger points be in my lecture. Providing summaries. When and how should we provide summaries? All along the way. If we wait till the very end, it's too much. That's why I said one of being explicit is breaking it into small chunks. So when we've broken our lecture into small chunks, after each chunk, we can summarize. Either we can summarize, we can ask the student to summarize. One strategy that I've used before in a content-based class is have them summarize in Chinese. If your Chinese is good enough, you will know whether they get it or not. If they get it, they've just helped all the students also get it that may not have understood your presentation in English. Great little way to, in 2 minutes, check comprehension and make sure everybody else is on the same page. Something like that is an acceptable way of checking comprehension and getting that summary in, because they're the ones providing the Chinese. So you're doing two things there. Big summary at the end, key ideas is important, but summarizing all along the way, having these little stopping places is good. What I had you just do by telling each other key idea, it's a mini summary. I'm asking you to do the work. I'm not checking you, but if you can't summarize to each other, you know there's a problem. And hopefully I will train you. If you can't do it, you need to ask me. It was my classroom, that's what I would do is if you can't summarize, we need to go over it again. So that's why I provide the question slide next. So that you can, any problems that you came up with or anything that you're disagreeing on, you can now ask. Repeating key info. Anything that's important is worth repeating. Anything important is worth repeating. When we repeat, students will think this is important. So there's different ways to repeat. One is exact words again. Another way of repetition is rephrasing it, but using the same key vocabulary. It's not a bad thing to repeat. Repetition is good. Any other tips on repetition? I have actually asked students, do you get it? Do you understand what I look at? If there's an important concept, do you get it? And then I will do like this, yes, no, I don't know. Like, I'm not even sure if I understand. I'm wanting them to physically respond to me. At first they're like, no, I mean it. Yes, no, I don't know. If I see one student hesitate and give me just a head nod, I will repeat for everybody. I'll say, okay, let me repeat it. And I will repeat again, no problem. Because if one student is willing to shake their head, I know more probably do too. And again, that way we're not asking them, do you understand? Yes, I understand. But paying attention to those little micro things, they will know. I've also had them in front of themselves. Do you understand? Yes or no? And that way I can see whether or not they do. Yeah, yes, no. Do you get it? Yes. Because they're embarrassed. They don't want to stand up and say, I'm not understanding. So I will have them just show me here. And nobody else knows what they've done. But if I see one or two of this, I'm like, okay, I'm going to repeat again so everybody benefits from hearing it one more time. Here's the key concept. And they don't have to be saying, oh, one who didn't understand, well, this is the... Nobody has to know who told me no. But I'm repeating it for everyone. Everyone benefits. All right. Utilizing examples. This one was mentioned by students multiple times. That having examples either from the professor's personal life, from case studies, or from that will relate to students made the lectures under. So I'm specifically thinking of a finance professor, accounting professor, who often used 7-Eleven. All the examples came from 7-Eleven because he knows, especially this building, that 7-Eleven is frequented by students. So he kept using that 7-Eleven and bottles of water as his examples over and over again to make the lecture relevant to the students. But any stories that you can pull from your own life or your own experience in your field will help students as well, because it makes something abstract concrete. So taking the time to use examples helps students understand, to simplify it that way. And these examples can be extended examples that last for a long time, like a 20-minute example that we get into, or it can be a very short one. But as long as we're exemplifying along the way in different ways, it's going to be helpful. Another element is signposts. This one is very easy to research. This one is very easy to study. It is very important, but it's not the most important. So, but it is, I find that the same thing is true when we teach writing in the English field. Grammar is easy, it's right, it's wrong. So we focus on the wrong thing. I think we can overemphasize signposting, but remember I told you, if your language level is good enough, it's going to be understood. So signposting is one of those things, if you get bogged down and I've got to remember all the signposts, you're overstressing yourself, overtaxing yourself with something that's not important. So here's what signposting is. It is important. We do need to guide our students, but we can't guide them if we're not structured. So to me, it's not the signpost that's most important. It's making sure our lectures are incredibly structured. We have the beginning, we have the middle, we have the development of the middle, we have an ending. And that structure, if the structure is there, the signposts will come naturally. If our lecture is not organized, and if the lecture is not structured, all the signposting in the world is not going to make it more organized. We're like slapping Band-Aids onto a weeping wound. So, how important is it to guide our students through our lectures? How important is it to be guided through a lecture?
I think it's how important it makes the whole process easier to understand. For example, we have a topic, and it's a really hard one, and we want to know our way, how we should understand different aspects of it.
So it takes hard topics and makes them easier to understand. Helps you know how to approach an issue.
And the PPT should be well designed.
Yes, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But that's coming. But that's not linguistic. Yeah, so basically we've got these three elements. We've got the opening of a lecture, the continuing of a lecture, and the ending of a lecture. And so which part do you think it is most important to be clear and explicit in? Beginning, middle, end. Beginning, beginning.
For all of them?
Trick question. It's important for all of them, yes. I think the beginning is one where teachers often fail. We could be more explicit. And once we get into the habit of it, it can help our students immensely. But all of it's important. As we're transitioning from our points to our subpoints to our examples, guiding them through everything is an important part. And so, yeah, I agree. There is not one part that's more important than the others. This is like a basic, just like an essay, the basic structure of a lecture is you begin with your introduction, you have different things you're trying to bring in, you have a final section. All of these movements, we want to give them cues that we are moving. And so these are all opportunities to cue students on that movement. Now we can, and I'll say that part. Okay, so we want to give those cues. So, my question here, do you struggle with being clear in outlining your lecture? Is that something you've thought of before? Have you tried actively to do it? I think you might be our only actual EM. Are you teaching an EMI now?
Next semester.
Next semester, okay. The rest of us are English teachers. As English teachers then, do you start out by saying, here's what we're doing today? This is our plan for today. This is where we're going. Oh, you do content in English.
Yeah.
So do you start out by saying, this is where I'm going today?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Here's our essential question today. This is what we're concentrating on. What are some tips for being structured? What do you do to help yourself be structured? Keywords. Like on the PowerPoint, keywords.
Or just on the board.
Just on the board, keywords.
Board,
Okay.
outline.
Mm-hmm. And so putting your lecture outline on the blackboard. Okay. Any other ways of being? Providing examples. Okay.
Begins with a good syllabus. I mean, the syllabus already has
Yes.
sort of taglines.
It goes back to pedagogy again. If you've got a good structure for your syllabus, you have a good lecture outline of what each lecture is going to develop, the ideas. So it's not just a linguistic thing here. It is, you've got to have it structured well. You've got to have it broken into chunks. And if you know where you're going and what your points are, then it's easier to communicate those to others. I teach a class on lecturing, and students, one of the things is that our examples are very well structured, but in real life, it's not always that way. But if we're going to be teaching EMI and that kind of context where they're second language learners and second language users on both ends, we've got to be well structured. We've got to help them process it that way. Like I said, this is easy. We can find this anywhere. I'm going to zoom through it because it's not the most important part, but this is that linguistic thing. Teachers who are using phrases like this to cue students are helping their students a lot. We'll talk about another element of this too, but keep them simple. And these are not words you don't know. Let's move on. Well, all right, good. What are the reasons for this? Very easy. It's not complicated English here, but on the other hand, first, second, right? It's not big, hard English that we're talking about when we're signaling our students. This is the result of the survey that I did online for on linguistic input strategies. On a 7-point Likert scale, all of these qualify as helpful to students. And we have things like using examples. Using examples ranks the highest. Repeating important points, summarizing main points, defining words, using humor. It's not what we're talking about, but that's also one. Repeating keywords. So repeating important points, repeating keywords, clear transitions, even using Chinese, spelling out words. So make sure they've understood what we're saying, using questions. All of these were students found effective. From the open-ended questions, again, practical examples are mentioned. It was mentioned so often. So utilizing practical examples, breaking down into small chunks, using Chinese, describing difficult words in simple ways, and repetition. So we need to remember our cue dress. If you can remember cue dress, That will help you with all of the different linguistic input things that are most effective in helping students. Do you see what I just did? I repeated and I summarized. Same slide again to remind you. All right, so these things are what we need to be doing, all right? This is the linguistic input strategies. Ready? 1 minute, just 1 minute, go. Tell your neighbor one thing about input linguistic strategies. Sylvia, come on.
So we should be shaking our head or.
Yeah, which way? Yes, no, maybe.
Papi 现在网络没有问题哈，
暂时没有问题。
没有问题。
对，这里网
因为
络
现在用 Google Meet，
没有降落
YouTube 那边没有声音，这个问题哈。
啊？
刚刚 YouTube 那边是没有，
不是这个问题，
没有，
但不知道是什么问题。
因为有人说 YouTube 那边没有听到。
对，
Okay, any
我
questions?
现在是用 Google Meet。
At this point, any questions? I have the Slido going. You can add questions throughout the lecture, then at the end, I can look at the questions from the online audience. So if you want to add questions now, I will look at them at the very end. But in here, any questions right now at this point? We're good?
You mentioned that translating difficult topics to Chinese is highly important for some of the students, but at the same time, is it good for improving their language skills? Maybe better to put hard topic in simple ones and try to.
I would say
explain
both.
it.
I wouldn't say,
For example, you have the group with B1 level certain German. Would you like to translate or everything in Chinese?
oh, I don't think everything, I'm not saying translate everything you say.
Oh.
I'm saying like right now, if the word explicit, offering Chinese as an extra definition at the bottom under the English one. I am not saying translate yourself by any stretch of the imagination. That won't work. That's not what EMI is. However, if there is a concept that students need to know, like this is the concept that this is about, I can use one word in Chinese and capture it. So that, oh, that's what he's talking about, and then explain it in English. So the explanation then goes to everyone, and they know what they can attach the Chinese to. The understanding is now in both languages. They know it, the word, they know the term in Chinese now, they know the term in English, and they understand it by the English explanation. Does that make sense? I know that is unfair to students from other countries that don't do Chinese as their native language, but that is one of the things that we can help students do when the vast majority of them are. But no, I'm not saying translate everything. I'm not even saying explain it in Chinese. I'm saying provide the term in Chinese so they can now attach this idea. Because what's going to happen is they're going to go off into the world in Chinese and only have English understanding. They need to also have the Chinese, like they need to be able to attach that definition to both terms. So that's not an unfair thing to do. To spend the entire time only defining it in Chinese, not okay. But to provide the term so they have any background knowledge they have, they can bring with them, it's helpful.
In written form?
Written form is great, but if you have it on the PowerPoint, you have that term in both languages, fine. Or if they just throwing it out verbally one time, okay.
Yeah, because I think the danger of putting too much Chinese is you explain it in English, they won't listen, they're just waiting for you to say the
Yep.
Chinese.
No, that won't work.
Yeah.
That's not what EMI is.
I would like to share my experience.
Go for it, please.
Several years I was teaching in Hong Kong, and I can speak
Cantonese.
Cantonese, yeah, and all of the students can understand Chinese, but we of course are English,
Mhm.
and I find they don't understand HRM, some part of them.
Okay.
So I call for one student. I think I felt that she was
She's
good.
getting it.
Yeah, and explain with their language.
Yep.
And I also understand what she called.
Yes.
Even but
Yes.
I can understand all of them understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is absolutely absolutely an okay strategy to use, to have the students speak the native language to make sure check comprehension. And there was one time I did it before my own Chinese was well enough to understand. They catch each other. But that's not what she said. And they'll figure it out together. So even if, yeah, it can be done otherwise as well. Any other questions? Thanks for clarifying that. All right. Okay, so now we're going to look at paralinguistic strategies. So we talked about linguistic strategies. Now we're talking about paralinguistic, and this is still under the umbrella of input presentation. So what is paralanguage? Para means beyond. So paralanguage means beyond language. So paralanguage is what we do with our voices. It's beyond just language. So it's how we use our voices to communicate. Communication is broken into two big categories. We have nonverbal and we have verbal. Verbal is all of the words. This is when we study the language of the language. Nonverbal, we break it down into body language and paralanguage. So this is what we're looking at right now, and that's paralanguage. So body language and paralanguage, how we communicate meaning. Let's see here. My mama was the one who taught me the importance of paralanguage, and this is my mother. She always would tell me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that's most important. There was one time she'd asked me to do something and I said, yes, ma'am. And she was like, I was like, what? I said, yes, ma'am. And she's like, it's not what you say, it's how you say it that's important. So she made me then practice 3 times saying it with respect. She's not wrong. We can communicate a lot with our voices. And so let me demonstrate just the basic idea of paralanguage really quickly using this one sentence. Where are you going? So if I were to say it this way, where are you going? Versus, where are you going? 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 Paralanguage. How our voices communicate meaning. Now, you're not going to do all of that variation in your classroom while you're lecturing, but my point is to communicate what is paralanguage and what can happen. So what does need to happen in a classroom? There are 4 things we can adjust in paralanguage, and then we can use the P's to help us remember. Pace, pause, power, pitch. These are the elements that we can control our voice to help us communicate effectively. So pace. Pace is how fast or slowly we speak. It's if you're running a race, you're going to set your pace. Same thing with speaking. We can set our pace for speaking. So in an EMI context, what are we looking for pace-wise? If I go really fast, can you understand what I'm saying? Will the content go in because I'm going really fast? It's on the PowerPoint. No, that's not going to work. What if I do this? You go slow enough to aid understanding, but not so slow that I'm reading my slides to you. Will that help? No. With pace, we have to find a happy medium. And that happy medium is slow enough to aid comprehension, but not slow enough that we hinder comprehension. And one of the things that, as a native speaker, I struggle with is we reduce and we combine. And that is harmful to students when they're trying to understand because they don't know how words are reduced and combined. So we need to slow down enough that we're not running our words together so much that it hinders comprehension. But we don't want to slow down so much that no one can understand anymore. There's got to be that place in between. If we slow down too much, we lose meaning as well, right? So it's going to have to be a happy medium.
So the thing about it, the Chinese difference is that in Chinese they don't have houses. They just have
The streams and streams of non.
just continuously
Yeah.
speaking.
That's one of the things I'm going to mention. One of the ways that it belongs to another category, but it's kind of here too, is chunking. We have to figure out where those pauses are naturally, like where the commas would be, and make sure that when the phrases are there, we stop and give a pause in there between the phrases. because it also follows with pitch. We'll talk about pitch in a minute. In English, we have each phrase has its own little pitch unit. And so when we don't know where to pause, we don't know what to do with intonation, it hinders comprehension too. So that's all, it's all in one big bucket together. But yeah. The other thing we can do is we can slow down at certain times. When we are defining a word, slow down. Go even slower. When we're repeating ourselves, because this is an important point, they must have slow down. So you don't have to go the same pace the entire time. You can slow down for certain parts of your lecture. For pause, this is what we're talking about here. With pause, this is using silence. This is what may have been happening with that teacher who was asking any questions or asked a question and no student responded. Okay, because you're not responding, I'll respond. They've learned that teacher doesn't have that any time frame there. It doesn't give them the discomfort of silence. It makes him more uncomfortable than it does them probably. So he fills it up anyway. That's one of our biggest weaknesses as teachers is filling up the silence because we are nervous. So we've got to become comfortable with silence. It's okay. And it feels much longer for the speaker than it does for the listener. When I stop and I pause and I ask a question, I feel it feels longer to me than it does to you. Because you're still processing, comprehending, taking notes. And I'm going, why are they not answering me? Why are they not answering me? And so I get more anxious. So with this, you want to make sure that you use pauses to give you and yourself, your students and yourself, a chance to process what you're hearing. Those pauses are not bad. And I probably could add more into my own classes, my own lecturing. You're like, yes, you should. We need them. It's one thing that we do need. The other element here is that wait time for answers and questions should be long enough. Do not be afraid to wait. And I will often use my timer on my watch to make sure I'm waiting long enough because it's a weakness I have of rushing. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. I'm going to give you a full minute until it vibrates again. All right. Next is power. Power is how loud or how soft our voice is. The more common word for this is volume. But I'm using P to help us remember it. What do we need to know about volume?
Be loud enough for the students to hear you.
Yes, loud enough for students to hear us. So actually, when I was interviewing students, they said there are some teachers who should be using mics that are not. Then there are some who are using mics that shouldn't be. So it's a very personal, your voice, your body, your ability to project. Where are the students sitting? If you've got students in the very, very back, you're going to have trouble. You've got to bring them forward. Bring them to the front so you don't have to yell at them. Okay? So what we want to make sure of here are a couple of things. One, we have to speak loud enough. Using a mic, if necessary, can be helpful. But we also want to vary our volume to highlight ideas. When something is important, we can go louder. You can also pull it back and be soft to catch attention as well. There was one 2 weeks ago, I was talking at a high school, and the teacher says, I use silence and quiet talking to get their attention. Like, when you can hear me, then I can when you hear my voice, then I will continue. And she waits for them to come back down. So we use volume to highlight key points as well. The final one is pitch. Pitch is the up and down of our voice. We also call this intonation. So intonation is how the voice moves. Key things here for this is we can use intonation to highlight ideas. By using certain pitch, it draws attention in. It makes it interesting. It keeps interest in, and I will demonstrate in a minute how it does not. This is what Mark mentioned. We've got to make sure we're grouping phrases together because phrases have intonation, certain kinds of intonation. So if we're not phrasing properly, then we are going to become incomprehensible or it's going to be harder on the listener to understand. So this is something that non-native speakers could work on, is their phrasing of practice the phrasing so that the intonation can follow. And then finally, we want to avoid monotone and reading tone. So I will give you examples of both. Monotone is when we don't have any pitch or anything and we always are talking at the same tone and it's just going like this, no up, no down. It's more typical among men than women. that monotone. You can even Google monotone readers that will read textbooks to put you to sleep. Like that's the purpose, because it's very sleep inducing. So if you are using monotone and your students are going to sleep, it might be the monotone that's doing it. Reading tone makes you sound like, one student said it sounds like a statue, was how she described it. When the PowerPoint is there and then the teacher just stands and goes, well, okay, pitch is how your voice goes up and down, includes highlight key ideas, it keeps interest, root phrases. It's this like the rhythm is off, the intonation is off, everything is off, and comprehension down. And I will get to that point when I talk about PowerPoints later, why that happens. So we want to avoid monotone, we want to avoid reading tone. We want to use pitch to help us to highlight key ideas. So again, the 4 P's are pace, pause, power, and pitch. And we can use all of these to help us, but they're all interconnected too. They're not that it's, yeah, they go together. Interestingly enough, babies in the womb at 24 weeks are already aware of the paralanguage of their mother's native tongue. They have tested this, and they've at 24 weeks, they're already being aware of it. So it is something that we are born with understanding and being sensitive to. Really cool. So how much power do you think paralanguage has in communication? Any ideas? A lot. Okay, I'm going to do what I did. How much percent do you think belongs to paralanguage? Somebody over here. 50%. Someone over here? 50? More than 50?
I think it was 60.
60. I'll go 60. I'll go 60.
It's interesting. I was just going to say this today in my class. I showed them the word "oh yeah," and I was asking them. Okay, I gave them a choice of different definitions for this. But all of them chose the definition of being excited instead. But here, actually, in the conversation, it was "oh yeah." Like I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
So the intonation changed the
is a
meaning.
huge difference.
Big deal. Big deal. Yeah. Yeah. Same. So here's our breakdown again. So we're saying this is about 50 to 60 is your guess. Early research in the U.S. in 1967 put it at 38% for voice. Body language was 55%. Research was redone a couple times, and again, this is the U.S. context. Up to 60% can be words. I mean, up to 60% can be nonverbal, 40% words. So it's not quite this much in all contexts. So in a lecturing context, we're going to fall more on this side because what you're saying is important. They are creating concepts for me. But still incredibly powerful. A lot of meaning gets lost when our intonation and our pace and our volume is not what it should be. It's incredibly important. So again, students' results or their input, when I asked them about these specific things, that articulating clearly was the highest. And I think what that is, they're talking about there is slowing down enough that we're not running words together. Special intonation to mark points was incredibly helpful. Slowing down pace some, raising your voice to speak louder, all of those were helpful. Their own input here was emphasizing keywords, speaking slower, teaching in an excited way. What teachers love, students love. So if we aren't excited about it, why should they be, right? Clearly enunciating, speaking loud enough, emphasizing key points by speaking them louder and using special intonation. So we can draw attention to points with our voice. We can draw attention to our points with our words. And when we do both of them, it's amplifying it and making it even easier. So it's not either or, it's both and. We need to be emphasizing with our voice and with our words. Okay, ready? 1 minute. Go.
The importance of paralanguage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's what this section. 4 P's. 4 P's. I think Amanda demonstrated very well to the whole voice.
I told you that's the most nerve-wracking thing I'll talk about.
Yes. Tapi 请问我们现在有多少个网络那边
36。
哦，不错，不错，不错。
I'm not excited. Why should you be? Yes. You have to be on the whole time. Yeah, it is exhausting. Okay, any questions? Sylvia mentioned that it can be exhausting to be excited the whole time. One question I had was if you want to do something like this, when you set students off to talk, do I need to control the language they're using? If it's an EMI classroom, should I control the language they're discussing with each other?
But do not overact.
Do what?
Overacting.
Overacting?
But when you use body language, you can already just. The time lapse is especially with the Taiwanese students, it seems weird or unacceptable because most
Body language?
Yeah, because
Oh,
they
look.
don't use body.
You're getting ahead of me. That's coming. I'll get there.
You're asking whether or not they're discussing.
Yeah, so my question to you is, since you don't have questions for me, I have a question for you. When I let students go to do something like this, tell 1 minute, there is a pedagogical reason why I'm doing this. If you can't explain it, you don't understand it. And what you can repeat, you can remember. So it is a way to help you to remember the concepts. I mean, it's not just to fill the time. It's not just to, my daughter's by there going, me. I homeschool her. And every time I read to her, she has to repeat back to me her own summary because that's the art of narration and it's an element of learning. So my question to you is, when I ask you to turn and talk to your neighbor, how much do I control? Do I control what language they're speaking? Do they need to do it in English? Is it okay if they do it in Chinese? Is it okay if they do it in Malaysian? Or do I need to control? We're an English classroom, English only in here. I agree. In the EMI classroom, as long as they've got a common language, the concept, the point here is comprehension. Are you comprehending it? So, okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. So now we're moving on. We've done linguistic strategies. We've done paralinguistic strategies. Now let's look at extra linguistic. So para means beyond, and we're still talking about language. Extra means even further beyond. So extra has the idea of outside. So extra linguistic means extended past language, outside language. So extra linguistic is broken down into 2 categories. I'm sorry, here, back up. It's communicating without using words. And so how we communicate without words is broken into two categories. One is through our body. One is through the use of visual aids. So we're going to look at both of them, but we're going to start with body language, right? So how do we use and specifically, we're only looking at the things that are going to make us more effective as lecturers, because there's a lot that we could be looking at. But one of them is movement. And for movement to be effective, it needs to be natural and purposeful. We're not just pacing the classroom. We're not just, moving for movement's sake, just to make it more exciting. It needs to be a natural movement. We also can use it to show connection and to keep interest. So if we spend the entire time right here reading our PowerPoint to our students, we've already lost a lot of attention. It becomes very boring and why am I going to pay attention? Now, can you sit down because you're tired occasionally? Sure. But moving around shows I'm with you, we're together. There was a table here that blocked me from you. And I left it there at first. I was like, I want it gone. And I moved it so that I can get closer. It shows connection. And it builds that connection. When students feel connected, they're more willing to learn from us. So it's an important part of it. Also, it helps to keep interest. Because once I sat down, their brains sit down too. The other thing with movement is we can use it purposefully to show progression. So if I'm talking about some things, I'm comparing and contrasting, I will actually, on my PowerPoint, put them in 2 different categories, 2 different places. I will stand here to talk about this one. I will stand here to talk about this one. I purposefully move back and forth as I'm talking so they will know I'm talking about this concept right now. I'm talking about this concept now. I physically move to amplify even more my contrast that I'm making. If we're talking about a timeline, you can even say, like, you're talking about a process. The beginning is here, the middle is here, the beginning is here. It is okay to physically move to enhance understanding of what you're discussing and explaining. Along those same lines, we've got gestures. Gestures is how we use our hands. Most people underuse them or make them too small. Now, I have gone to Taiwanese speech contests, and the students have memorized how to use their hands. Don't do that. There's from what you're laughing because you've seen it happen. So from one extreme to the other, from no movement at all to this over-the-top exaggeration that has no purpose but movement. We want to make our gestures natural and purposeful. So in lecturing, how can our hands be purposeful? How can they be natural? We can show things, there are things that we can do to, my words are gone. Can we finish this thought first? We want to make them bigger than we think necessary, but not over the top bigger. Because most of us use them too slow, or too small. So we can show number. We can do 3. I have 3 points. We can do it to show sequence, first, second, third, first, second, third, whatever we're doing. We can physically show progress, sequence with our hands. We can show transition. So literally on one hand, on the other hand, to begin with, okay, my next point is, we can literally move our hands to show the 2 hands of what is going on. Emphasis. We can use our hands to show emphasis. What are we pointing at now? What are we talking about? You've got your outline on the chalkboard. You come over and actually point. Okay, my next point is, you come and tell them where you are on that outline you provided for them so they can follow you, not just voice only. Sure, give them a signal. Okay, next point is. But if you've got to physically move over there to help, it'll help so much. Emphasis, focus, contrast, 1, 2. Location, to actually point where you're talking about on the graphic designer or the concept map that you have on the board. Illustration, to illustrate something small, big, whatever it is you're illustrating, you can use gestures for that. And communication. Like I told you earlier, I have them responding, are you getting it? Yes, no. Help me out here. So they can communicate back to me as well with gestures. Okay, you ready? 30 seconds this time. Go. Movement, body language, what do you got? She's got it, she's good. Yeah.
Use it to don't exaggerate. Natural. I think what Nana was talking about is what they call speech.
Yes, the speech contest, and the students will learn to
memorize the speech.
Yes, and they will. That's the only time I see Chinese using gestures is for the speeches. So they actually want the hand movements there.
It's a tradition.
It's kind of like singers.
But I think it goes into other, that tradition has spread to other places though, and it becomes, like even college speaking contests I've watched, it's not.
It seems totally childish, but you still do it as an adult.
Yeah. Okay, check in. Any questions? We're good? Yes? All right. So next, moving on, we talked about body language. Now moving on to the other category is visual aids. And we're going to talk about different kinds of visual aids that have been studied. One of them is handouts. And also, I'm going to refer to them as cognitive aids. They help us in thinking and processing. Examples of handouts that can be used in an EMI classroom includes a lecture guide. You provide however much detail you want to go along with the textbook content, a guide for your lecture. It could be short, it could be long, it's up to you. A glossary, these are the 5 words that you must know the meanings of before you can understand today's lecture. Give it to them ahead of time, let them look up the words, give it to them at the beginning of class, however you want to do it, but providing definitions ahead of time that they can access. Making content visual. You can use the handout to make concepts visual, and I'll explain that in a minute. But if we can help make things visual, we will reduce the cognitive load, and it can be helpful to students. So concept maps and graphic organizers can help them. So if you're comparing 2 different things, give them a matrix so they can plug in the lecture notes into that matrix. Give them that tool to help them, or at least provide the opportunity for them to know that might help. Work problems as examples. If your class includes things that require them to solve problems, like I was looking at a student today in electrical engineering and she was showing me how to wire a microphone. And it was like one of the homework assignments she had was this wiring of the microphone. Maybe not wiring a microphone, if that's the homework is wiring a microphone, the work example could be wiring something else that's similar, that's going to run into similar problems. So they can look at the work example for inspiration and understanding of the example they're going at the problem they have to solve for you. Same thing would be true with like other math classes or things like that, providing work examples for them to examine, to figure out comprehension, where the problems are. What else? Any other handouts that you've used that have helped in the EMI context?
YouTube.
YouTube?
Yeah. Short video.
Okay,
Use.
so like on the PowerPoint? Not on the handout, right? So for PowerPoint, okay, that's fine.
Questions on the handout.
Questions on the handout. You should be able to answer these questions by the end of, or the questions you're going to ask.
Discuss them in your class.
Discuss them. Okay, these are the questions I want you to discuss. You should be able to answer these questions before you leave here today. Games. So, oh, so like a crossword puzzle of the vocab, like that kind of thing. Okay, so some kind of interaction. Anything else handout wise? Okay, Blackboard, whiteboard, whatever the board you have, can be utilized to put down keywords, sketches to illustrate ideas. I sketched a lot today in one of my classes, had the PowerPoint, but as I'm telling my story, I'm using the whiteboard to help me tell the story so they can comprehend the story. Important numbers, if you're getting dates or you're getting a number that's not in PowerPoint or you're not using PowerPoint, writing down the numbers can be helpful. Students have a hard time with numbers. And so rather than just, well, your listening's not good enough, give it to them. Write the numbers on the board as you're going. Hank said you could put the whole outline there if you want to. Let them know where they're going on the board as well. Anything else, whiteboard?
Drawings?
Yeah,
Draw stuff. Oh, yeah, sketches.
sketching, drawing, outlining, charts, whatever. Yeah. Have students go right on the board. Yeah, you can have students go right on the board too. I've done that as well.
And draw lines to connect the main ideas or examples. I use a lot of lines.
Okay, so you have different things on the board and then you're connecting them by drawing lines, connecting ideas that way. Okay.
Structure.
Okay, with presentation slides, what our goal is with presentation slides is to visualize the content. And we want to help them to see it. We don't want to give them every word we're speaking or every point that's important for them to know. We're trying to help them become visual. So we're communicating key points that way. Presentation slides are not data dumps. They should not be your handouts, and they should not be the teleprompter. Because this is easy for us to do, but I would suggest you make your handouts differently. You pull out only certain slides you want them to pay attention to maybe, or I'll have like 100 slides, students only get 10. Or it is, the handout goes along with it. Maybe I have 5 slides and I put it all on one slide for them. That's not a data dump, we just throw all the information in. If you put every word on the slide and you're going to read it to them, they're not going to listen to you because they can read faster than you can speak. And so you become pointless. So why are you even there? So we don't want to put everything we're saying up on the screen. It is not helpful. If you are needing a teleprompter, if you're needing something to help you remember how to pronounce a word, or you're needing to remember key points of this research that was done, or the point you're trying to make, learn to use presentation mode in whatever slide maker you use. I know Keynote has it, I know Google Slides has it, PowerPoint has it. This is what it looks like in PowerPoint. The slide that I'm teaching is here. The next slide I'm going to teach is here. Here are the notes to help me remember what I want to say. That is okay, because the students aren't seeing this, they're seeing this. And so the information I need to go with 9,000 people, 42 countries, I can remember from semester to semester those details without having it on the actual slide. Does that make sense? And you can adjust these things. So another class, maybe it looks like this. This is the slide students are seeing. I have my text really big and the next slide kind of small. Or it also helps you because I know the next point that's coming. So it's not just the next slide, it's the next button of animation. So I'm looking at this, I know this is coming. Yes.
One thing I've done though, because I find that sometimes students don't understand everything I'm saying, especially if it's a little bit technical, is that I first say it and then I show it on the slide.
Okay.
Yeah, because right as you say, if I just showed what I was going to say on the slide, then they'll just read that. But if I say it, then they've heard it, and then they see it, then they can check their comprehension.
B key. Black out. It's awesome. If you want to do that, you can use the B key. I just made the whole thing disappear. It'll all come back.
Yeah, okay.
So you can absolutely do that and like just reduce that load if you want to. If it's like we'll talk a little bit about reducing cognitive load. So if it's too much at the same time, sure. I can even do white if I want to. I can whatever color I want. But you black it out and you can, here's the next point. I'm going to give it to you and then give it to you visually. That'll work, yeah. Good. But yes, absolutely utilize the presenter view to help you remember what you want to say. How keys to making a great PowerPoint that will be helpful is to kiss and kill it. So kiss, keep it short and simple. Kill it, keep it large and legible. You want to keep it big. So the kiss-kill method. 1 point per slide. Don't use a whole lot of colors. Keep the fonts simple, the fonts large, lots of images, and smart art. I don't know what it's called in Keynote or Google Slides, but in PowerPoint it's called smart art. And smart art takes concepts and puts them into bubbles and categories and makes it visual for you. Right? So I just mentioned this, that reducing of the cognitive load. In research of how much we can hold in our working memory, we can only hold so much at one time. And this does not just include content coming from the teacher. This also includes the fact that my phone is vibrating and my boyfriend is mad at me and I just failed a test in the class before that. All of that is affecting how much we can process in our working memory. So when we overload students with too much on the slides or too much at one time, nothing gets remembered. And there's never going to have a, I got it moment. It's just not going to come because they're overloaded. So we want to find ways to reduce cognitive load. So in PowerPoints, here are the ways we can reduce cognitive load. One is to give fewer things to focus on. Instead of having lots, we have less. And I would even go less than this too. We can highlight what we want them to pay attention to. We're going here. This is what we're looking at. Not just with this, but actually on the slide itself. This is where I want you to look. Put things together. And I know this sounds simple, but we don't do it always. If you're going to label something, put it close to where it is. Don't stretch things across. Take text, make it visual. Same information is being presented. Same case study, totally different layout. This one has way less cognitive load. I don't have to process all the words. So less text, more images. Another one is repeat and reuse, or rinse, wash, and repeat. We're gonna do the same thing again and again. I use the same format in some of my classes for every single PowerPoint all semester long. So these are coming from different lectures throughout the semester. They all look exactly the same. Why? They know this is me switching topics. Every time they see this slide, it's a new point I'm making all semester long. So it makes it easier for me. I don't have to keep recreating creative stuff. It's the same the whole time. The next one is this. At the beginning of every class, I have the slides look the same, all semester long. This is my topic. Every time I give directions on what I want them to do, it looks just like this. And then the ones that in the end of the class, the summary slide, it always looks the same. So that it takes away that need to try to comprehend every time. Here, my information slides, they all look the same. The concept is here. What I want them talking about is on the bottom. This is the conversation. I'm asking a whole class a question, looks like this every time. And then I'm trying to make a point they need to remember, it looks like this. I just use the same set over and over and over again. By doing that, I'm reducing cognitive load. They don't have to process everything. So, some more examples. I'm gonna go fast, but that's not the important point. The other thing is I want to repeat again. I know I teach language, not physics, engineering, and big content classes. So your things will look different, but you can still take key concepts away. Directions, clear. Explicit directions. Find your partner now. Fill the whole slide with the question I want them to focus on. Nothing's distracting you. That's what I want you talking about right now. Visual. I've taken the textbook, I've reduced all the extra around the textbook that they're looking at, and here's what I want you to focus on. Here's the main point. Directions for my low-level students, give them to them in pictures. Here's exactly what I want you to do. Yes and no. I make it as visual as possible because they were doing this and I don't want them to do that anymore. I want them to give me the structure. Cool. Okay. Visual. Communicating my pride in their homework. Correcting pronunciation. I'm giving an assignment, explicit directions, very clear. I could put all of this on one slide. I don't have to make 5 slides for it. Why make 5? You're focusing on one thing at a time. Then examples of other students, I actually let them watch one of the students' examples. Everything I've turned it visual. These are things I want them to pay attention to. It's a combination of visual and words. Timeline is visual. Here's the steps we're taking to get things done. Make it as visual as possible. Yes, Daniel.
Yeah, you just mentioned something about PowerPoint having, was it visual art? Was that?
Smart art.
Oh, smart art. How does that work? Are these things taken from smart art? Or?
Nope. This is not. This is a student introduced me to Flat Icon. These are coming from Flat Icon, a free website. But I can show you what smart art in a minute. This is smart art here.
Oh, that's smart art.
Yeah. I just type it as a text box and then click smart art and
Oh.
And then maybe some of these are wrong and so I'll change them. But yeah. It does its best with AI to guess what I'm talking about. Make it as explicit as possible. Like I could give this instructions with lots of words, or I can make it very concrete and break it up as here's exactly what I need you to do. And all semester long, it's always 3 categories. Microblogging, English Central, final project. Every single time they're doing the exact same thing in the exact same order. Again, directions. It came up I took away all the animation for the purpose of this, but I make everything as visual as possible, breaking it down into steps so it's easier to process. I'm going too fast. Do you want to take a picture of something? Which one? This one? Okay. So here I'm giving feedback. And what I did for feedback is, this is what you did great. This is what you could do better, room for growth. So I actually use the big tree to represent, you're strong, you need to grow, rather than you're bad, right? So giving feedback on their notes. And if I have 30 students, I can't give feedback to all 30 in class. But by doing it this way, they don't know whose paper this is. Everyone's benefiting from the feedback I'm giving them. But I've made it as visual as possible. Right? Again, same thing. Big questions, focus on. I've used these. Right now, I want you writing. Right now, I want you thinking and talking. Now, I want you thinking. Now, I want you talking. So those follow me all semester long to tell them what I'm expecting of them. Big visual here. What's as possible? This is what I'm expecting of you. Giving the directions this way. And again, this is how their homework is lined up every semester, every week. Sorry. So, kiss and kill. Keep it big, keep it large, keep it legible. You can always overcrowd. I don't think you can oversimplify as far as PowerPoints go. Here's what students said as far as extra linguistic is. Look at that. Everybody, almost everybody, including keywords on the PowerPoint. It's helpful. It helps them know where we're going, what we're doing. Key ideas on the chalkboard was also incredibly high. They need that visual. It's called dual coding. They need that dual coding to enhance their ability to understand. Graphs, tables, handouts, PowerPoints, images, specifically images, large gestures moving around. The body language they claimed was less helpful, but they need that visual dual coding. Strategies they described helpful, visually organizing the ideas, PowerPoints, class notes, large words, again, gesturing and moving around, saying, ready? You're getting tired. So 30 seconds, go. Handouts, PowerPoints, Blackboard, how do we use extra linguistic things?
Making it simple,
Yeah.
using a lot of visual.
I think so. What does it mean? And
And
keep it.
also the concept of art.
Yeah,
I think it's a feature it's what the software itself.
it's supposed to be inside of software. I haven't seen.
So yeah, I
Something
don't know how to
new.
use it, that's why I
Here, in Germany.
She has very good PPT.
Yeah.
She's been trained. She has not started using it.
Whiteboard.
I never do it.
Yeah.
But that's what I get, the idea that.
When I was in college, we had chalkboards that split up.
Yeah,
They
that's.
split up and slowed down, yeah.
Well, nowadays it's like
Yeah.
a C thing.
Although you see, at one point I thought maybe this is overload. At one point she says make it visual, and at one point I said, think about it, and then there's other pictures. Well, why distract the students with the picture? It already says think about it. Do they need a picture? So sometimes it goes both ways, right?
Yeah, good.
Any questions?
We're talking about what should be your next workshop.
Oh, what my next workshop should be.
Yeah, how to use those apps to make it wonderful.
Yeah, I think, when I come here, I think there's, must be boring. Those are excellent.
Okay, I'm glad I surpassed your expectation.
Oh, there's no.
Question, comment?
Yeah, I had a question. I was just talking to Diane because you say keep your PowerPoint slides effective,
Large and
visual,
legible, yes.
simple. What I was thinking about at one point, you have an assignment for students that it says think about it, and then there's a picture that represents thinking. Is that, yes, you say make it visual, but is that picture really necessary? Because it does say think about it, right?
See,
Then
that's
I wonder about overload then in the sense, visual overload.
That think about it is coming from the textbook. The textbook actually says think about it there.
Okay.
So like one of them actually has think about it with a pen, then it's think about it with like, I'm actually telling them, the think about it there is like in that specific instance is the textbook title.
Okay.
That's what, but yes, if it wasn't the textbook title, I would get rid of the think about it text. Yeah, good point. I agree with you.
Yeah, I hesitate to ask this question because I can understand if you said no. Will this be available? Your PPT will be available online?
I don't know.
Yeah. I can understand.
Or if you want specific parts of it, you can let us.
Yeah, there's something you can before this.
Yeah. If you want certain parts, I'm happy to share certain parts of it.
Okay.
I don't think I'll do the whole thing online
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah.
And some question is, so good the workshop is perhaps depend on your personality.
Absolutely. But the thing is that, okay, so you make a good
And I
point.
don't know, would you mind repeating the question?
Yes,
people
okay, so
online
our
can hear
question
it?
is, maybe one of the dynamics is actually the personality or the person who's doing the teaching. Are you ready? I can wait. It's true. But the good news is that there are things that make you effective no matter what. And so there can be I've had teachers who were very dynamic and it was great to listen to, and they did these things. I've also had teachers that kind of stood pretty still, but they still desired to communicate. They still did these things. They still used intonation. They still used clear slides. They still are, at the time, probably chalkboard. But the ideas were still presented. It wasn't dynamic, but it was still effective. So these things make you more effective no matter what your personality is. So yes, if you have a out there personality, but I would also argue part of being a good teacher is having a good rapport with your students. Because if we don't have that rapport, that relationship, that somehow connection, why should they care? And so it does take us finding out how we can make that connection. And sometimes it's by being mean, and sometimes it's by being nice, and sometimes it's by being, you know, casual. Sometimes it takes different times at different, you know, stages of building that rapport. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. Let's move on to content presentation strategies. So there's three things, remember? We had input presentation, content presentation, and pedagogical. We've done all the input presentation. Now let's look a little bit at content. I'm going to pull from the language field of language education, foreign language education, and one of the most famous ones, Krashen's idea of bringing in input plus one. If we overwhelm students with too much, they're not going to have anything come in. So it's called the input hypothesis. We have to be careful how much we put in. So the idea is that students' current language level is here. We can add a little bit more each time. And over time, we're going to see growth as we keep adding a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. Here's what we don't want. We don't want to just start building on what they don't have yet or ignoring what they already have. And we don't want to add too much. Both of these are not okay. Too much new content or excluding previous experiences. I think this is why students ask for examples. Pull in from their lives helps them to comprehend the new. So the idea is, I don't want to have not enough. I want to have just right. I don't want to have too much. So how do we do that in the EMI context? I mentioned it before. We want to reduce cognitive load. So if we're not talking about PowerPoint slides here, how do we reduce cognitive load in content? What are some content presentation strategies we can use to reduce cognitive load?
Show document.
There you go. Show your little YouTube video that will visuals, will give native speakers. What else? Play music.
So,
I had an art teacher, like she had us memorize the music, the things we need to memorize, and she did that for each. Never remember. I'm tired. I always remember the song, and when we liked it, they all liked it because she put it in the time. Absolutely.
I said, focus on the headlines, Chinese.
Okay.
And then for some issues that are related to the topic we are going to. So the students, they got some background idea.
So quickly building background knowledge by providing headlines in Chinese. Okay. We're talking about like social issues.
Yep. For example, really related picture that might also count.
Okay, images. Finding images that help to communicate or that open us up for the discussion. Okay.
bring samples, bring objects.
Yes,
Depends
bring
on
in
what you teach.
real stuff. Yeah, bring in the real things that we can touch and can, yeah.
Pass it on.
Mhm. Content presentation strategy. We want to be explicit. We want to reduce cognitive load. We want to structure our lectures well. We've already talked about that, but we're bringing it back up again because we can't add the linguistic element if the content element is not there. So we want to make sure we're structured well so that we can add in the signposting for the linguistic element. We also want to break it into smaller parts. Break it down into these are the chunks you need to know. So it's called chunking in elementary school. Focus on the critical content. Sometimes when we're excited about what we have, we may want to chase rabbit trails because it's fun. But if we get sidetracked with things that are not important, it becomes distracting. So we want to focus on the things that are critical, the things they must understand. Give examples. provide scaffolding as needed. So this would be providing, okay, so I can give you an example from the high school that I helped last time. It was a bunch of English teachers that were having to have their students discuss Frankenstein by using a very complicated like the story, the plot chart, but with big words. So like, rising exposition and the climax, and it was the big words for high school students here in Taiwan. Like, how do we do this? I said, you don't start with Frankenstein, because what we've done with Frankenstein, we have Frankenstein, which is cognitive load. We have plot, which is cognitive load. We've got to reduce it somehow. So let's throw out Frankenstein first. Let's do Three Little Pigs. So I taught, and I used visuals to do it. Let's do the plot line, and let's throw out the vocabulary too. We're not going to use climax and throw those out too. We're just going to do the map and the Three Little Pigs. It took us very quickly. Students can now figure out, okay, this is the beginning of the story, the middle of the story. We put pictures on the actual chart. They now know plot. Now what's my next step? Let's give the words to this. This is a climax. This is this. This is this. Now they know the words to describe the plot chart. Now, let's do it with Frankenstein. So that's scaffolding. I break it back up to what you know so I can build up to where I need you to be. Rather than giving you this very hard thing and saying, okay, now let's just talk about all this and figure it out. I break it back by giving you that scaffolding that helps. So we can provide scaffolding as needed. Do we always provide scaffolding every time? No, when it's needed, when necessary. Same thing here for this one, provide cognitive aids as needed. And that would be back what we're talking about before with handouts. The glossaries, the graphic organizers, things like that. Dual coding. We want to be visual and verbal at the same time. So this is like what on my slide, it has the thinking person. I want them thinking. So the slide matches the activity that they're doing. That's called dual coding. It helps reduce the cognitive load for them as well. And Hank was right. On the PowerPoint, it had think about it. If it was just, I told him the reason it was there is because that's what the textbook called that activity. So if the textbook wasn't calling it that activity, and I didn't want them to focus on that part of the book, I would have removed it. It would have only had the thinking person, just the visual only. Okay, so let's think about it for you now. Think about one lecture you gave this week. What are 2 changes you could make that would help you present content more explicitly? And then share with your neighbor. But I want you first to do this before we go here. So take like 2 minutes on your own to think about a lecture, and you can think about a lecture you heard this week. What could the teacher have done to be more explicit? All right, so what is one lecture that you gave? What are 2 changes you could make to make the content more explicit? All right, and I'm going to provide that for your memory. 2 minutes to 2 minutes to think first. No talking yet. Lectures in Chinese, you can still think. Okay, ready to share? Go to your sharing partner. Each of you share one idea. If you have time, you can share 2, but each of you take first share at least one.
So what are you teaching them now?
that's the problem. The only thing that Cheryl has, I don't see do this, which is the Bible literature class.
The students have reading subjects.
Right, and they do discussion and sharing, there's questions that they provide, and they provide groups and certain answers with the class.
That's my problem. So I'm teaching literally reading for graduate students. That's how I feel about this course. Semester after semester, I teach it once every year. Since Commissar Zero.
And then we come back to how to put this in
I could have made it my good key,
They're so,
but then I'm not there.
so excited.
If it was relevant, yeah.
And I wanted to show me
How many questions can I put on this discussion? It opens up a can of worms.
I said, I always say
This is what they teach outside on. Being critical with myself. I'm going to admit that maybe I should get into this.
No,
You know, it depends very much on the subject.
Thinking about today, I tried to speak, I went to the literature class and management department. I talked to this person today, but there's some additional things I could have said. I'm going to go to another class. And
You were doing the mentoring.
yeah, I mentioned, yeah, and then I jumped to today.
I'm gonna sign up
There's some ideas, but there's a few more things I could have said. Because he was making a lecture, and every time he asked students a question, they didn't answer, so he just answered some questions. Yeah, he was a very traditional lecturer. I told him, I mean, no teaching large classes. It was very difficult. They just different things that students sometimes come because they think that that would might be that or you're not going to notice. Or it's hard to help students understand. So I try to find ways to help them to check to understand it. This was another part of my idea. Maybe being more visuals. There's a lot of information. And also, the organization is very outline through basically the vocabulary taken out. And so when they're listening to your lecture, and his attitude was, if they don't come to class, I don't care. If they pass the midterm or final, it's fine. That's all I care. Oh, okay. So it depends on the attitude of the teacher.
Alright.
So why would you be a teacher? They can study the subject.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I asked them-
Can you grab your phone again and scan the code and then let me know what you think is the biggest impact? Which one of these would make a biggest impact in lecturing? It almost sounded like an Egyptian, like a snake charmer.
Hey, do you know the efteling? Efteling.
En Nederland, ja.
Yeah, Nederland. The music is not also in the interview.
Yep.
We went there a couple of times. Exactly.
Or and mortar. And while we're inputting, anybody want to share something that you discussed?
We can can choose more than one? Or?
Sure.
Oh, okay.
It says biggest, but I need to limit you. So structuring, making sure you have good structure, putting out examples, cognitive aids. Cognitive aids work well when you structured it too. You can combine the two together. Those making the cognitive aid can help you to structure. Okay. Alright. So let's move on to pedagogical strategies. The last topic here, we've done input presentation, content presentation, and then pedagogical. And as I mentioned before, every field has their own techniques they're going to use. You're going to have your own approaches to this because of the field that you're teaching. So what I'm saying, you cannot use for the different to have, but it is definitely something that higher education is looking into, is how can we be at teaching, not just pouring in ideas. So pedagogical strategies, I love this. Right? She says, so two teachers at the start of an adult class, I want to make the classroom more student-centered. You mean you want to have students have greater control over the content in the lecturing outcome? Well, mainly, I want them all to come sit at the front of the room. And it's funny, but the reality is, I think that's one of the most important things we can do as teachers is to get our students to the front. Because if they're scattered around or they're in the back, they're already starting off by distancing themselves from us and making our job incredibly difficult, and the whole class is going to be a much harder class to teach. So I bring them to the front. I don't let them sit in the back. And I move them a lot. They're moving constantly in my class as well. So yeah, but that's not exactly what I mean. Encouraging active participation. If we want them to actively participate, having them near us is good. If they're in the back, it's going to forever be a struggle. And if they're scattered, if you have a classroom that holds 90 and you only have 30 and they're scattered out, there's no way they're going to actively participate. So we've got to get them close to us. We've got to get them to the front, next to each other as well. A lot of times I want them to choose their partner from the very beginning. So they're always going to that same person. Active participation is the one pedagogical content strategy I'm going to talk about today. Active participation increases higher level thinking, it increases critical thinking, it increases recall and retention as well. It is highly effective in helping our students to remember, to think deeply, and to take home the content as if it was theirs. So how do we get students to actively participate? Part of it is personality. You've got to build that relationship with them. And if you're not willing to build that relationship, why should they care? And so when I talked, I'll see some of their comments in a minute, but we talked about some of the students, they said, I wish my teacher was approachable. I wish my teacher welcomed questions. I wish I could come to her after class. They want to be able to approach. They want to be able to. So if we have a personality that says, don't bother me, I'm busy, then why should they respond to us in class? If we don't have time for them, why should they have time for us?
Yeah, I would like also share another experience.
Go for it.
When I say agree or disagree, yes, for example, 100 students inside.
Yes.
Yes, about 10 over 50.
Yes.
And no, 7. And I say, who else unbroken?
Humor is excellent. I do the same thing. Humor isn't like at all. Yeah. Who said nothing? Or I go, who is tired and wants to go home? Like just pulling them up, waking them up. Yeah. And what we allow is what will continue. So if we allow the first time for that little bit, we don't push it, then we're never going to get response. So we've got to be able to. And a couple different things. One is I play games at the end of my sophomore class with my students, but one time near the beginning, I think the second week I did it, they switched to Chinese. The game, they were no longer using English, and I stopped. I set that boundary early. Or yesterday in the class, I told another group of freshmen, I said, don't make me a policewoman. I don't want to come and police your English usage. And so it's miserable for you, it's miserable for me, but because they were all, I asked them to stop for 4 minutes with a group of 4 people, and immediately they just stopped. So if we allow it, it's going to continue. So we've got to stop it early and encourage it from the beginning. And I will actually use quotes. He who asks for a question is a fool for 5 seconds. He who does not ask is a fool forever. I will start my class with inspirational quotes like, questions are good, let's ask questions. Or when they do ask, oh, that is a great question. I have no idea. Maybe you can look it up, maybe we can look it up, let's check later. I don't have to know all the answers, but I can encourage the question asking. And also, I'll get there, not yet. So I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so how do we do this? Oh, finally, it also keeps students engaged. If we're having them participate, they're going to be engaged, they're going to stay awake. It also helps us to gauge comprehension. Are they understanding? So when I'm asking you to go talk one by one, I'm popping around to different people every time. I can listen to you. Are you getting it? Are you not getting it? Is there a mistake that's being made by several people? I immediately know whether or not you have it. The same thing I did with that, which one do you think is most effective? It doesn't have to be just an opinion. It could be a true false question. Get everyone to respond quickly. Oh, half of us aren't getting it. Let me reteach that idea. It allows us to gauge comprehension. So, let me see that one. Eliciting frequent responses is one way to have active participation. And there are 3 ways we can elicit active responses, frequent responses. We've already talked about this one already. Action, physical action. So hand signals, gesturing. We can ask them to act out a process, like physically move their hand to show they understand something, like a physical concept, if it's a physical thing. We can do written, and written has 2 elements these days, physical writing and digital writing, or digital responses. Things include response cards. I bring those little tiny cards, pass them out, bring the hand back. Exit tickets, I like to do 3, 2, 1. 3 things you learned today, 2 questions you have, 1 thing you want me to know. You can do anything 3. 3 points from the lecture that you think are important, 2 things you want to do, blah, 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 1 thing that you have 1 question for me. A written summary. Do you get it questions? So throw up a question in here. Either I learn, Tron class on the phone can do quick quizzes, or like I do a Slido, you immediately get feedback, or using the Slido app for different feedback. So you can have digital feedback as well. But getting that feedback allows you to know whether they're getting it or not, and allows you to adjust as you go. I like doing exit tickets, whether it's just a piece of paper that I never see again and I'm the only one who looks at it. The act of writing down what they've learned helps them to process, even if they never look at it again. 2, asking questions. They anonymously get to submit their questions so I can answer it for the whole class. But I respond. If I do that, I need to respond to it the next time. Right? And then finally, oral responses. So one of them, very classic one, is think, pair, share, which is what I just did by having you first think and then pair off and discuss how you could adjust your class. That's called think, pair, share. 1 key idea, I did that one several times after this little chunk. Tell your classmate 1 key idea. Cold calling would just be, you get to tell me the answer. Random number generator. iLearn has a random generator that's already plugged in for your students. So you could go into iLearn and randomly pick a student, and it'll have the student's name pop up. So you can let iLearn choose. And I think iLearn will even give points. Like you can say yes or no to give them points. Or I also do something like someone from this row. Like I just told you, like someone from over here, someone from over there. It helps to push the pressure on that one group without being the whole room. So we want to elicit responses. So we want to remain approachable. This is from students' opinions on, these are things that they begin saying that's, I'm losing my words. In the open-ended question of my survey, these are things students mentioned that I think fall into this category. Instructors who remain approachable by welcoming questions and encouraging interaction. They like it. They like that effort that's being put in. They want time for discussion. They want time to apply concepts. They want the teacher to read the room. So if the room is having trouble, they want the teacher to respond, not to ignore the fact that there's, everyone's heads are starting to fall asleep. Last time, 1 minute, go. Key idea about pedagogical strategies. And so specifically, how can you do active student engagement in a lecture class? I haven't listened to you guys yet.
I was going to say to that I learned something just now. I didn't know that I learned how to
Yes.
But sometimes it doesn't work. Well, I mean, if it's, I use it in the classroom and with my phone, and something was connected through using the app on my phone to the computer in the classroom. And it worked, and then the first time and the second time, nothing happened. I go to the computer, but it worked. But
I'm not using my phone, I'm using from the iPad app from the class.
yeah, there it worked, but it was kind of, I was playing around with it at home, and it worked fine.
You will also before you randomly.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it's a fun one to when you group them, yeah.
They don't teach it to the around this way.
Right.
But if it's a great technology.
I think what's important
So slideshow, like the way I began to begin, what are you scared of here? What are you scared about?
this is the kind of screen, right?
Yes. And I may require like, if you only have one student sitting in it, it might be then sometimes I can get anonymous. And their question doesn't appear alone. Or on the paper. I have it on paper, like Google Exit card. I have Google Exit card.
What do you think? Place the cards and then have them write it and give it to
Yes. Or I have them just tear off, tear off the page of their notebook and have them page of and give me, I usually do the one. 3 things that you, something that you learned today. 2, what you have for me. 1, thing you really don't want to forget. Every time I do it. So that I just, they know 3, 2, 1. And questions. Range from really great questions. Sometimes they're content questions, sometimes they're I have my all that I'm preparing for. So it's everything how the class is right now. It helps me gauge where they got things on the other things.
So you try and answer this in the next class.
Yes. I mean, Okay, we are at the end. Are there any questions? And the QR code is open. I don't know if anybody online is still with us, but the QR code is open. If you want to submit questions digitally, you may. If you would like to ask your questions orally, you may, but I'll take questions in any shape or form at this point. Are there any?
Very good, guys. So the floor is open for questions. Matthew, maybe can you check the chat or Slido, maybe a different ways, Google Chat or.
Is anybody still there?
Yes.
Online, are they still there?
It's so difficult. Concentrate.
Well, I'm sure many of you have questions. I mean, but if you are shy, I'm happy to begin. begin with one question, because
Okay.
about the gestures, because body language is very culturally defined. So is that a question here? Because we do have to admit that, Chinese, Asian culture, gestures, body language are going to be very different.
From my understanding, culturally, gesturing is going to be different when it's symbolic. So like, okay, you're going to have money versus okay versus flipping someone off in Brazil, or you're like just a minute versus I'm making a point. So yes, there are some things that are absolutely going to be cultural. But if we're simply talking about first, second, or your numbers. Okay, so I have 6 points today. Somebody may not get that here, but there's only so much you can. It's still going to be beneficial to use your hands to help to show or to physically move across the room. That's not going to be a problem. But it's more the symbolic meanings that are different culturally.
And it's going to also move into colors, and shapes, and visuality.
Oh, absolutely.
Because in financial, being in the red.
Yes. Yes.
The red is good
Yes.
in these cultures. So. Maybe put some of the BBTs or graphics, things like that.
An excellent point to pay attention to. Knowing which cultures you are in, what you have, and that intercultural competence is there.
Shapes, exactly.
Actually, I just thought of something else. I mean, this is something I do in one of my classes. After the lecture, I also put things online, kind of a basic outline of what we did in the class. For those sometimes students don't come to class, it's good for them, but then also for those who come to class and didn't understand everything, they can go back and look at and review it.
So do you do that in handout, like a PDF form, or just type it into like just the?
I put a PDF, but I don't allow them to download it because I don't want them to just copy it and give it to the next class of students.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, with I learn, I don't check.
Right, no download available.
Yeah.
Okay. You have a question?
Any question online?
Oh, you're talking, you got into the cultural differences gesturing.
So we understand that we kind of appreciate that many of the professors in fact they trying to implement different varieties of ideas in their lectures, but it's very important to understand all the time. Good to use actual materials, good to use generalities and stuff like that, but professors should focus no matter about the topic, the main topic is we can use everything we want to, but it should be matched the topic.
Okay, the point he's making is that it's helpful for the teachers because we appreciate teachers adding in new content or providing their own materials to supplement the textbook. But it's the same point that I made on reducing cognitive load. We've got to keep that critical point, the critical focus, our focus. The critical content needs to be. So anything that we use supplemental needs to actually report that critical content.
Not overloaded.
Yeah, because then it's going to cause cognitive overload if we're supplementing too much and taking away from that critical focus of the concept they should be learning.
All the time looking at the whiteboard and this kind of presentation this week is supposed to practice
Actually doing the computations.
improve our skills.
Okay. Just the name. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions? We're good? Answer the questions as we went along the way. So what's most important? When I also, in addition to the online survey, I interviewed students. I interviewed 8 students. 4 of them were seniors, and they were from around the world. So there was international students as well as Taiwanese students involved, and they all mentioned communicator. They said a successful EMI instructor is a good communicator. And here's what they said. While they're well aware of good presentation strategies, they said that the heart of good communication was a teacher who liked their students and wanted them to learn. And so I think that's very encouraging to me, because if our point is just to communicate a bunch of ideas or just to get content out, we're going to be missing the point. The point is we want them to learn. So where's our focus? Is it pouring out content, or is it helping learners learn? And there's research in the higher education field on learner-based versus content-based. What's our focus? And so the students obviously could tell there's a difference between content-focused teachers and learning-focused teachers. So what they said about successful EMI instructors, a desire to communicate, empathy for the student situation, that they want to answer questions, go the extra mile to make sure they understand, that they're interacting with students, they're engaging the class, and that they help me get the content from the book into my brain. I love the way she said that. They need our help. They want our help, even though sometimes brainwash them. Yeah, but she's wanted in their own unique way. She wanted to help me get it into my brain, help me to understand the content. I asked them to give advice to a new EMI faculty. What would your advice be? And they said, be approachable and friendly, not to feel threatened by student questions, interact with the class, don't be afraid to have fun, and to bond with students. So if we want them asking us questions, we need to not be threatened by the questions. If we want them asking questions, we need to be able to have that rapport with them. And if we're lacking that rapport, they're not going to want to ask. Right? So the consensus of the interview seemed to be that teaching ability and the desire to communicate is more important than having great English. And this matches. Students are willing to look over poor accent or vocabulary snafus if the teacher is willing to communicate and is able to. And so since these teachers are able to find alternative ways of explaining it. Use paralanguage to highlight gestures, use clear visuals, design, use different ways to present and illustrate new vocabulary, break complex material into smaller chunks, scaffold in different ways, reduce cognitive load to students, and utilize repetition and routine. That's what we can do. And Patty would love it if you would fill in the QR code one last time to say how lovely and wonderful I am. Just kidding.
Thank you very much, Amanda. You are indeed lovely and wonderful. So indeed, please, colleagues who are here today and also the colleagues online, if you are still there, greetings to you. If you could please check the QR code and fill out the questionnaire. We appreciate that very, very much. I think if any of you still want to maybe communicate with if you want to communicate with Amanda, perhaps over the next few days, you can go to the website of the English Language Center. You will find her email address there and communication information. And so I think Amanda's a very friendly person. She will not bite you. You can get in touch with her. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer your questions if you have any more questions in the next few days and weeks. So thank you all very much for joining us here today. I believe that we will have another workshop in 1 week. Is that right, Paffy? What is the exact date? Paffy, the next workshop will be on December the 8th. We will have a workshop about composition, writing activities for students. All right. Does it work now? No?
Yes, I can show you.
Open the camera.
Camera, right?
Yeah.
Try one more time.
Let me try the computer.
Oh, I don't have a problem yet. Computer works.
Right, computer, right? Sorry, I'm just checking.
The way this questionnaire is a little bit strange though. About unsatisfied at the top. I almost. Yeah. Okay.
This is
Satisfied, unsatisfied.
this is a photograph.
Anyway,
I didn't create it.
yeah. Well, should be the other way around. We're going to.
还是用那个吗？还是用那？那你不可是老师你可以打那个。
One question here is about
你
the
是说用那个
the
Google
online
OK
answer.
Then you're very satisfied.
HTTP
Okay. Maybe you should go set up. No,
这个两个斜线，然后ITHU
oops, mistake.
dot TW dot
I don't know if you
slash
change this. It should be classes. Classes.
Oh, sorry.
This is what's better. Classes.
Okay, I'll correct it.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You can correct
I'll
it.
correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Anything wrong? YUCK HTTP 这边可能多一个空格啦，2点多一个空格。
I know mine.
2点。
Have you taken my class?
还有一个search。
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Sam. That's what I saw you up there. In your voice.
这张表格是好像太多问题，
The last semester, right?
有时候非常不烦，我觉得问题太多了。
You sat me the front.
实体
You sat me the front.
实体
The front of the class.
是啊。